Hey everybody, welcome back to this week's episode of the audio series webinars. This week is a pretty special episode because we're going to be talking about communications, and I'm joined with a good friend of mine, Chris Johnson. He works for Riedel Communications. Actually, Chris, correct me on that one. What's Riedel's current official name?
Riedel Communications.
It is still, okay.
It is Riedel
All right.
Communications.
There you go. It hasn't been shortened to Riedel. All right, there
No.
you go.
Colloquially known as Riedel, not to be confused with the glassware company.
That's right. Yes, where you often get pointed at in a Google search.
I'd say one call a month. We get one call a month at the office.
Yep.
Asking for glasses.
Glasses. Yeah. Fair enough.
And then there's an award, of course, in it for any salesman who can convert that into a Bolero belt pack sale, because that would just be spectacular.
It would be. Yep. Yeah. Okay, guys. So basically, what we're going to be talking about today is the challenges that we have and the things that we face around communications. And because Hillsong Conferences postponed due to COVID, this whole series was sort of quickly put together. And as we would normally, because we would normally be going through these processes anyway and talking about these things. And because I handle basically everything to do with audio for Hillsong Conference from a project management perspective, communications is also part of that, because at the end of the day, it's still audio. So it's something that I hold very dearly, and I definitely, no one really values the communication system until it stops working. So that's when you find out the value of it, and we go from there. So looking forward to having a chat with Chris today. And Chris, why don't you give us a, oh, by the way, guys, the Q&A is open. Feel free to post your questions. Eventually this will be up on YouTube as well, so you can go back and have a look at, look at it again. But Chris, give us a bit of your background, mate.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So yeah, great to join you today. Like as we were talking about before we went live, this is about the sort of time of year where we would start having a lot of conversations about exactly what we were going to do a month from now over at Kudos Bank Arena. So it's like a bit of deja vu in a way. So yeah, from my side, I have been working at Riedel for the last 4 years. I originally took over the rental and service department. So providing our solutions, to events like yours. Now I'm the general manager for Australia and New Zealand, and I've been involved with Hillsong Conferences for quite a long time. Before joining Riedel, I had a background in audio, so I've done my time behind the console, done my time patching a stage, and some of that time was spent doing that with Hillsong events as well over in Europe. So, So kind of a lot of history there. I guess a little bit about Riedel. Riedel is really an infrastructure company now. Started in Germany about 30 years ago. Been in Australia for I think 13 years this year, and we manufacture equipment for communications, for signal distribution, that kind of infrastructure for events. So we're typically one of those manufacturers and suppliers who are kind of in the background. We're a little bit like the IT department of the audio department, right? Yep. And it's the same kind of analogy, isn't it? That nobody thinks about IT until it doesn't work, and then we all think about it a lot.
That's right. Yep.
And so certainly for Riedel, we're making wired and wireless communications products, as well as signal distribution products, and Hillsong Conferences are kind of a good representation of that whole ecosystem on our side, right? There's a bit of everything we do somewhere at Hillsong Conference.
Right. There is indeed, and I think on the second episode of this, we actually talked about digital audio distribution, and we went into depths of how we do various things, and things like we distribute Dante to the PA, and that's Dante, that domain's at 96K, and then we do the extension of MediaNet over dark fiber using CWDM to Hills for broadcast. And so we did discuss MediaNet a lot in that one, because MediaNet is pretty critical in the core infrastructure of Hillsong, because it is, or in conference anyway, because it is the backbone that carries majority of those signals. It's at some stages it's probably carried DMX at some stage. It's definitely carried ArtNet because of the Ethernet tunnels. It's carried Dante to the PA, as well as doing supplying the analog redundancy, things like that. But Yeah, so we'll be definitely touching on it. Going back and forth with MediaNet in this, in this episode. Um, but specifically, what we're going to focus on is the communications and how we've evolved in the evolution of communications at conference, especially because we consume a lot of it. So,
It's not a small system,
that's
that's for
not.
sure.
Yeah, that's right. And we've worked, you and I have worked over the years to get to the point where for us, color and conference is basically the same package. It's the
That's
same
right.
system.
Yep.
So it can be a copy and paste model. And there's also over that MediaNet extension that goes back to Hillsong Broadcast. There's also comms over that as well, because the broadcast ops still need to communicate. Yep. So yeah, there's still plenty of that happening. But yeah, so let's the big one that I always get asked about, and that's one of the reasons we kind of started doing this webinar series, is because I get asked an awful lot of questions via DMs on social media or even just emails, but a lot of it is, what do you use for wireless communications, or what is your communications infrastructure, and specifically what's the wireless side. So over the years, we've gone through Clearcom, FreeSpeak, Riedel, Acrobat, and we've bounced back and forth depending on who the vendor is. Quite a few years ago, when when it became mine to look after, I kind of locked my suppliers down, and we started packaging systems that we could copy and paste. And for me, especially when dealing with vendors and dealing with suppliers, I prefer to build relationships with them. So I don't want I'll ring you up, hey, send me a quote, here's a purchase order. Some companies like to wait. I would much prefer to build a partnership long-term that we can, grow on, and then there's a support mechanism there. So Riedel has definitely been one of those companies that I call a partner, rather than just a supplier, because, you guys help us out a lot. There's literally in the room behind me, there's an Artist 1024 in the racks that was like, I'm like, hey mate, I need you to get me out of trouble, and you just literally threw me a bone with that one. So
yeah, and look, I think it's a good point you raised, because to be honest, I could give one of the people watching this the quote and the PO and the spreadsheet, and that doesn't really tell you anything about how it actually works. That's right. I think that's really the point behind that, isn't it? That at the end of the day, you're not just ordering a bill of materials. You're ordering a solution, and what comes with that solution with us now over a number of years is a pretty in-depth understanding of what actually goes on. And I certainly think with communications, that's one of the things that maybe sets it a little bit apart from some other audio work and some other video work, right? Mm-hmm. In that, when you say to me, I need a comms panel at front of house, or you say to someone else, hey, I need you to patch that kick drum, the reality is anyone who kind of understands drums and XLR cable can patch the kick drum. But to provide a communication solution, you have to know a lot about what that person's doing.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
And it's pretty different.
That is, and that's what that's where those relationship has grown over years, where I can literally go to you and sort of give you a half a concept of what I actually want, and by the time I'm into my second sentence, you already know exactly what I want or what I need, and you've already got a solution in your head, which is what I love about with dealing with you guys. So, we've definitely, things like translations for the multilingual attendees and things like that. Like we've come up with some pretty cool stuff in the past, which we still use to this day. But yeah, so the evolution of that was more about building a relationship. So that way, when the team from Riedel, who are obviously mixed up of employees and contractors, come on site, they already know what to expect. They already know how we work. You've briefed them. When they show up, a lot of our stage managers and various wireless comms users often request a lot of changes or panels. So that's always facilitated. Whereas that's not normal on a like on a high-end corporate event or a theater show or anything like that, it's normally kind of set and forget, and the comms tech is basically babysitting, whereas like on our events they're kept very busy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I
so
think that certainly, you know, to some extent, whenever you walk into an arena from an audio and comms perspective, there's bits of that are the same. We've got to put speakers in the roof. We've got to run some multicast from front of house to stage. We've got to put some comms in.
yeah.
But then on top of that, every event is really different from all of those perspectives, right? So when we change the layout of the room, we have to change how the PA works. When we have a different kind of stage configuration, we have to change how that audio from stage to front of house works.
Yeah.
And when we have different types of people operating an event, that really changes how the communications infrastructure works.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's part of the difference, is that I think you could be forgiven for, say, going to Hillsong Conference and sitting in the arena and not kind of realizing all of the other stuff that's happening that you can't see. And that is something that it definitely makes Hillsong Conference very different to another arena concert.
Yeah.
Because backstage there's simultaneous translation for different languages. There's other venues for youth and kids that are linked in some way and need to talk to and from the main arena. There's Hillsong TV filming things that are either live to the web, or they're streamed somewhere else, or they're recorded for later. There's just a lot of moving parts there. And ultimately, all of those people have to talk to each other. And I think that the evolution of wireless is kind of interesting in the industry in general, right? Because, you know, way back at the beginning of doing events, we had, you know, 1 or 2 channels and we were plugged in, and that was fine. And then we grew in our need for more ways to talk to each other. So, you know, when we look at a Hillsong conference, and indeed a lot of large scale events now, that comms panel at front of house that the audio guy has is not just, you know, show and sound. There's a lot more to it than that.
Mm-hmm.
They're talking to and from individual people. They're trying to coordinate things that haven't happened yet, you know, with someone in the background while something else is going on. And so we had this kind of matrix intercom infrastructure where there's just a lot more customization. And then of course people want to be untethered and have that. And
Exactly,
that's what really drove the evolution, I think, of all this wireless comms.
Yep.
And it is incredible what the technology allows us to do today in terms of the types of creative moments you can put together and the types of events that you can put together now with this technology.
Exactly. And I mentioned previously, like, you know, we've used ClearCom FreeSpeak and Riedel Acrobat in the past before Bolero, but I should go back even further than that, because we did a webinar last week on basics of, you know, monitors and RF. And so I was actually talking about, like, when I first started at this scale of event, you were coordinating RF with a spreadsheet, and there was no software that did it for you. There was no magic tool. The monitoring equipment was very expensive and laboratory grade. So you could hire it, but even then, no one really knew how to use it properly. So I spoke about the fact that everyone forgot about the wireless comms because it was BTR, Telex BTR, and it sat in the UHF range. And we would only have 4 channels, like 4 belt packs, and each belt pack needed 2 channels, plus the receive. So you'd have effectively what is it, like 12 frequencies allocated for 4 belt packs, and then it got to the point where they wanted 8, and it's like, okay, it's going to be hard to, you know, get to that stage. And then it got to as we kept sort of, you know, adding comms, the UHF spectrum basically was almost made up of the crazy amount of BTR we had, and you know, basically having to deal with that, plus IEM, plus radio mics, and it's growing need on
you've
each
run
side.
out of spectrum.
Exactly. And then we go and lose 700 megs.
Yeah.
And it makes the problem worse. But by that stage, we'd moved to DECT, which sits in the 1.9 gig range.
That's right.
When that came out, that was a saving grace, but it was also a nightmare at the same time, because multipath reflections kill anything.
It's basic RF physics, right?
Exactly.
Once the frequencies go higher, the issue of reflections gets worse. And certainly arenas are nice and round, which we like from a presentation perspective, and we do not like from a reflections perspective. And that's true for RF, just like it is for PA, right? Like for audio reflections.
Exactly. So what, so the evolution of jumping from like, free speak and Acrobat and back and forth and trying different antenna placements and putting these decked access points around the room, and it didn't matter what we did in Kudos Bank Arena, nothing would fix the issue. So it wasn't until a couple of years ago we were fortunate enough to be able to use Boleros for the very first time, and they were the very first, I think they were the very first stock to arrive in Australia.
I think Hillsong Conference, this would have been what, 2017, was the first kind of project for us in the world with Bolero outside of kind of closed beta environments.
Yep.
So certainly it was basically the biggest deployment to date, because I think that first deployment we had 50 belt packs.
Yeah,
and now we have a lot more than 50.
That's right. So I only found out it was the largest deployment halfway through the conference when, at the time, John, the general manager, before you, basically kind of just blurted it out, and I was like, oh, that's good.
At the time was the largest event we'd done with it outside of the lab, if you like, where of course we'd rolled 100 belt packs around rooms and things and done lots of testing. Right. But it was definitely
got all the interns to walk around and.
That's right. Yeah, gather everybody. Yeah,
that's it. No, and I mean, and honestly, apart from like, I think like there was like one. And it wasn't even a Bolero issue. It was like an AS67 card.
That's right. Yeah, we had a little card issue.
Physical port on the back, which is like in the rental stock, it's wear and tear. So, and once that was solved, it was like flawless. So, not only that, the efforts we used to have to go to put antennas around the room and in the back dock and everything. I remember you specifically came to me and said, okay, so just behind monitors, I'm going to cluster 5 antennas.
And then I'm going to go to lunch.
Yeah. And I was kind of going, okay, well, let's see how this goes.
Good luck to you. Yeah, I remember that. I remember that. Yep.
I'm like, okay, well, if you got that much faith in the system, then so do I. Let's see how it goes. Yeah. And honestly, and I was blown away. Like I had been told it was good, and I had been, and other people that are that got to play with it, especially some of your contractors and stuff who got to play with it before we owned it, said it's actually unbelievable. You can walk around a stadium with one AP and it works.
It's fine. Yeah.
And it's fine. And we haven't every year since. We've just stuck the antennas in one spot, just clustered them.
That's right. Yeah. The whole arena is covered from that one kind of corner position over the main entryway.
This is a 22,000 seater in the round. And and we're only putting a 5 decked antennas or 6 decked antennas in the one spot, clamped to a metal handrail, mind you, which normally when you clamped the Acrobat antennas to the metal handrail, it would cause havoc. So you would have to move them away.
Yeah.
So what that allowed us to do as far as, so we used to have to do things like we would have to reduce, because of the complexity of running things in the 1.9 gig range, the complexities we have with decked, the issues that would come with it, we would have to, we would end up doing things like we would run the primary stage managers on decked based systems, and then we would have to put all the other stage managers and stage hands and things like that on 2-way radios.
Yeah.
Down in the, just below the 520 meg range. Yeah. And that was basically to try and keep it as robust as possible. They didn't really need to talk. They just needed to listen. So it was kind of acceptable. But these days it's changed the game. Like the backline techs wear Bolero packs, the follow spot operators, it's so much easier. Like we used to have to, you guys especially used to have to like literally run cables up to the follow spot positions in order for those guys. Exactly. There's so much confidence in the system now that we can just put them on a wireless belt pack, and it's so much easier.
And I think there's for me, the cool thing about how far wireless communications have come is how much we're able to enable new ways of working for people, right? Because there's a lot of times where if you can really give a guy, really give a person all the communication ability that they need, then potentially they could do the job of two people in two different locations who are tethered to things on a cable. And that was really the kind of the power of being able to do that. And of course, I think a lot of people might not realize that we cover the whole arena, absolutely, but also we cover all the backstage corridors and the dressing room and the loading dock. And so if you need to send a backline tech out to the dock to get a replacement app, they can just do that, and they can just stay in touch the whole way. So things like that are really key.
So for us, for example, like I mentioned, the follow spot ops. Follow spots would often be on. Previously, they'd be on wired belt packs. Sometimes they're on two-way radios, which was never good because they're not that intelligible, especially in a loud environment. But if they were on a wired belt pack, they would have to take their headset off, get up, walk away, go and grab a drink, go to the bathroom, do whatever they needed to do, and then come back and put the headset back on. Meanwhile, the lighting director's like screaming down comms, like,
they've missed something.
They've missed something.
Absolutely.
Now they don't take the headset off. They just get up, walk away, and even though they're behind layers of iron and steel and aluminium sheeting, they're still in contact. But I guess the one I get a kick out of is at ICC for color when they get into the lift and it still works the whole way up. And so every other form of RF drops out, but the Boleros, they keep working. So there's a question here from Daryl. What's the name of the system and or antenna? So as I just mentioned, the wireless system is called Bolero. It's from Riedel Communications. I'm speaking to Chris here from Riedel Communications, and that's the system that we use at Hillsong and especially at Hillsong Conference. And to be honest, I wouldn't want to use any other system. Because,
I mean, you can, and if you're interested, you can just go to riedel.net, check it out, and all the information's there.
There's pretty. I actually wish I had a pack with me.
I was just thinking that I'm not at our office today. I'm at my house, and I don't have enough Bolero in my house, Ricky. That's quite an important point.
Really? Okay.
I'll be talking to management about that, definitely.
Yeah. Definitely need something.
And I think the other thing that's kind of cool about the system we deploy as well is to what end can we, in all these things, and the rest of audio and indeed the other disciplines of production is the same, to what extent can we make things as flexible as possible without locking ourselves into something? Because certainly Hillsong Conference is an event that likes to be dynamic, right? You want to have the ability to do things on the fly. That's part of the kind of brief, if you like. And lots of events have that in too, but equally there are lots of events that we all do that are pretty static, where when we walk in the front door, we know exactly what we're doing. Nothing's going to change. We get it done, we leave. Exactly. And to keep it flexible, I think is powerful. And these days, not really any more expensive than locking yourself in.
No, honestly not. It's actually not. And I kind of like, because normally on this series we have Juzzy and we talk about, and you've done a couple too, like we talk about the scale of Olympic ceremonies versus what we do. And there are things there that are really static and the amount of resiliency in those events and they wouldn't change. We are literally changing things as the doors are opening. And we're changing things as the performers are walking up on stage, the set list is being redeployed right as the band is walking on stage. There's some crazy things that happen. And the only way we can actually facilitate that and be confident that it's going to still happen to the level of excellence that we want to put a lot is because of the communication system.
Yeah, and for us, it's absolutely true. We've done a lot of Olympic ceremonies. I've worked on a couple myself, and we did the 2018 Commonwealth Games, which was obviously the last kind of major global event here. And from our perspective, the system there is bigger because there's more people involved. But the framework's exactly the same. The level of redundancy is the same. The things you can do with it are the same. So it's nice, I think, for us to be able to bring that technology into the wider market. Because so it's definitely true that in general, when, as a manufacturer, we develop things, you often start at the top of the pyramid, where there's scope and there's budgets to kind of try new things. But what you always hope to do is to be able to bring that to a wider audience. And we can see that all around the marketplace, right? So if we think about, Digico consoles, they do a lot of development up at the SD7 end, but then you can buy all that technology at the SD11 end.
That's right.
And so certainly for us, with the Bolero wireless system, the Artist Matrix system, which is behind that, which does all the wired stuff and all the kind of core stuff, we really wanted to be able to bring that down the food chain, as it were, so that it wasn't like, oh, this isn't going to make sense for you unless you've got 1,000 people.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
And so we can, with Bolero, we can do anything from a few belt packs with one antenna that you just put on a table and chuck a battery on the back, all the way up to something like Hillsong Conference, where we'd have anywhere up to 50, 60, 70 belt packs, covering a large arena site plus other locations.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So, guys, just going to quickly point out, if you've got any questions, throw them in the chat or the Q&A. We're definitely watching them. So, and we're more than happy to answer them based around anything to do with either anything communications wise or the core infrastructure wise, which is what MediaNet's based on, which is also a Riedel product. And Chris is very knowledgeable on that topic as well. So, so let's talk about so obviously we've covered the wireless communications and how that's evolved and how impressive that's gotten and how much freedom that's enabled us to have. Let's talk about the wired communications. Now, because you mentioned the Artist Matrix.
Yep. Okay,
so briefly, so for the people out there that understand the basics of a party line system or a key wire, or as our US friends like to call it, just a clearcom.
Yeah.
Going from that to a full-blown matrix, what is a comms matrix?
Yeah, that's a good example. Look, I think you can think a party line is pretty easy to understand, right? Everybody who is on that party line, which if you're, really going back to basics, maybe you've got some analog communications belt packs that you plug in with daisy chain bits of XLR. Anyone who's plugged into that cable is hearing the same thing and is talking to the same group of people. Right. So that you can think of that a little bit like, your two-way radio, right? Whenever you tune to channel one, anyone else who's on channel one can hear you, and anyone who talks on channel one will be able to reach everyone else. That's your party line. When we talk about a matrix, what we're really talking about is a telephone exchange, right? So I pick up my phone. Once upon a time, it had one of those rotary things, and you picked it up, and I want to dial Ricki, and I dial his number, and it connects me only to Ricki, even though, of course, everyone in my street is sharing the same infrastructure along that path. It cables to a box in the road, and then it goes to a big box in Sydney, and then et cetera, et cetera. So when we talk about a matrix, what we're talking about is the ability to route voice to individuals or groups of people. And obviously, when we talk about communications, there's two parts to that, right? There's the audio mixing part, because on one hand, a matrix intercom system is just like a big audio mixer. But there's also the control part. So how do we make it so that when I want to talk to Ricki, I don't have to dial a number or patch a cable or do that. I just press a button that says Ricki, and then we chat. So that's kind of what we're talking about when we talk about a matrix intercom, is packaging both of those things into a single product, where we can give people a panel or a box of some kind that they connect back to the matrix. And so it keeps cabling simple. When we're dealing with analog belt packs, we had to think about, okay, if Ricki wants to hear the show channel, I've got to make sure I get a cable from the show socket and get it over to him, plug that into channel one, etc. When we deal with a matrix system, again, it works like your phone system works. You just need to be plugged into the network. Once you are plugged into the telephone exchange, every phone in the world is accessible to you. You just have to know how to reach it. And so one of the reasons we like matrix intercom systems is, although it may come across as being complicated, it actually can make deploying an event much simpler, because you don't have to think about, well, what does this guy need to be able to do when I'm plugging it in? I can think about all that later in software. All I have to do now is take his panel and plug it into the matrix, and then we're good to go.
Exactly. Yep. Actually, Croft, who normally is a host on this webinar, literally comment party line just the way I like it. And
well, the good news is for Crawford, of course, is that we can give him a panel with one button with one party line on, and he'll feel right at home. Yeah,
I talk to all. Yep.
That's right.
That's the beauty of a matrix.
Yeah.
So, so before there's actually an interesting question from Douglas right there. So,
yeah,
see that one? And
I do.
So when we talk about the matrix and we're talking about just plugging into the network, traditionally, especially with artists, it has been for some matrix systems over the years, it's been, now you talked about the audio mixing and routing, and then you talked about the control aspect. So you've got the transport plane and the control plane. So two sides of it. So traditionally in other manufacturers' systems and a lot of the older systems, you literally had analog audio in, analog audio out, and serial data for the control. And that was on a Cat5 cable.
Yeah.
So literally one twisted pair was audio in, one twisted pair was audio out, and you had balanced serial, whatever it was for the control side. Riedel actually came up with a system where you could actually use coax cable, 75 ohm coax cable with a BNC, which made it a whole lot easier for broadcasters to adopt.
Yeah, that's right. So we do AES3.
Yep.
For our original panels were AES3.
Yep.
And that.
So that's sorry, I should have mentioned that. That's the key indicator. I remember when I first really used a Riedel comm system, it was World Youth Day in Sydney.
Yep, that's right, yeah.
And I was one of the operators in one of the venues, and I had my console and everything set up in front of me, and I had my local monitoring and everything going on because I was behind a big glass wall looking over Darling Harbour in Sydney, and I was the front of house guy for the whole of the precinct there. I had a panel next to me, and there was a Riedel tech from Germany also in the room with me.
Yep.
And as soon as I heard the voice come over that, I was like, that is as clear as a bell. What is special about your system? And he's like, oh, it's digital.
Yeah.
And
that's exactly right.
I go, so what do you mean? He goes, it's AES3, just like your console has AES.
Exactly.
It's AES. And I'm like, that's impressive. And obviously it's come a long way since then as well. And we'll get to answering Douglas's question shortly about, when we decide to move things to IP and when it makes sense. But the evolution of that, of going from analog based systems and the early IP systems, which had compression, they used VoIP based compression, which kind of I would have preferred the analog system, to be honest. I mean, it was easier to deploy because you kind of just threw a network switch down and plugged everyone into it. But
well, the other thing we have to think about when we think about comms, which is really important, is latency.
Yeah.
So, I think it's probably fair to say that in audio, we sometimes worry too much about latency. And in comms, we often don't think about it enough.
Mm-hmm.
So, when you're doing monitors, latency is really important because, if I have 20 milliseconds on someone's mic into their own in-ears, that's just not going to work. When you're doing front of house, it's a lot less important because probably to time align the PA, you had to add 20 milliseconds to parts of it anyway. So if your kick drum takes 10 milliseconds to get to your console, it kind of doesn't matter. When we talk about comms, latency is really important because, of course, when you're trying to execute really tight timed things, then of course you have to say go, and you need to know the other guy's going to do the thing without a half a second delay. And that's one of the problems with those early IP implementations, is the trade-off for that was latency.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a big problem. So when we brought in the AES3 system, the goal was really a couple of things. First of all, we wanted it to not be complex. So like you say, back in the day, you had these analog panels, you plug them in with a Cat5, but on that Cat5, it's really like a multi-core, right? You've got audio in, you've got audio out, data in, data out. That's fine. The problem is, though, you really had to run a cable from the panel right back to matrix. It couldn't go through anything because it's like this proprietary type of signal. Exactly. So one of the things we wanted to do with AES3 was go, well, if we use AES3, we achieve a couple of things. Firstly, it's digital, and it's just 48K 16-bit audio. So at the time, that was what you would, if you want to do digital mixing, that's what you'd do. you'd use exactly that format. So we kept the quality up there, which means when we're dealing with audio signals in the comm system, we don't compromise on anything. But the other thing we were able to do is use the data that's present in AES3 to deal with the data on the panel, which means that AES3 signal that goes into the back of your Riedel panel is just normal AES3. So if you had AES3 cabling or routers or other infrastructure in your big broadcast facility, you could just use that. No problem.
The common use case there was if you had a AES to MADI conversion, especially like a lot of broadcast facilities would do this, you would literally take the panel and it's AES3 in and out. So you would just plug it into your direct out technologies or your whatever brand X converter, convert it to MADI, and it's literally just, as long as it's bit transparent.
That's right. As long as it's keeping all those user bits, no problem at all.
Exactly. And you mentioned the fact that you're 48K 16-bit, whereas a lot of us, where we used to 48K 24-bit, those additional bits were actually utilized they were the user bits. So that's where the signaling for, when you press a button, it activates a cross point, or when somebody calls you, your panel lights up, or that specific, and you've got the reply keyword.
Yeah, and you need all that data. Yeah,
you need all that data for it to work for the control side, and that's the control plane. Yeah.
The other cool thing that AES gave us, of course, was the ability to use Cat5 cable, which is convenient for a lot of people, but also coax cable, as you said, which is convenient for people who are putting an intercom system into a video infrastructure, right?
Well, that's exactly. And the outside broadcast companies loved it because they already had coax running. They already ran lots of coax multicores.
Yeah, it's a lot more robust as a cable. It's got better shielding. It's easier to fix in the field than a Cat5. Yeah, so it makes a lot of sense.
Exactly. So no, that was and that was something that kind of set you guys apart from a lot of the other manufacturers as well, when it came to integrating into existing cabling plants.
Absolutely.
It was easy to go. So sort of moving the evolution of, while everybody was trying to go IP in the early days, this was predating AES67 and Dante. So there wasn't a true well, I mean, we can say Dante is a proprietary standard, but I mean, there's so many people that use it that it's almost a standard within itself. But AES67 in the truest form of a standard, all the other vendors trying to go IP predated those standards. So a lot of their IP technology was proprietary. It used a lot of the voice over IP compression mechanisms, which introduced latency. It also didn't sound great. Because it sounded like a 64K or it sounded like a phone call. If you've ever used a voice over IP phone system, they don't sound fantastic. They don't sound like I sound right now or you sound right now. So we don't get that level of quality out of it. Whereas the one thing I always appreciated about the Riedel Artist series was the audio quality. And that's even down to the speakers in the panels and the gooseneck mics and the headsets and everything like that. And I mean, that's just stuff like you come to expect that kind of thing from German manufacturers, but
it was important. It's an important point. And going back to what you mentioned about translation, the artist system that we use for Hillsong is carrying a lot of things you might not traditionally think of as comms. Right. There's a lot of audio. I mean, the translation audio is live audio that delegates are listening to, right? So this is we have to be able to deliver that quality. Absolutely.
So people are paying for that experience, and we definitely want to deliver the quality. So so no, that's so sort of going back to sort of Douglas's question, where it's like, where does it make sense to move to IP? I'm definitely going to let you answer this one, but sort of briefly, because of my background, my experience with IP, when the AES67 standard was ratified, that changed the game. And that now meant that you could deliver the same form of quality over IP. So
the quality aspect, I think, is important. I think that the important thing that people do whenever they're thinking about how to do one of these technical tasks is to really start by thinking about the workflow, because I think it's important that technology should be a way we solve problems. It shouldn't create problems for us, right? So we were talking about this before we started today's webinar, but when people say, I'd like to connect that camera or that microphone to that mixer and it's 20 meters away, Well, the right answer there is a piece of XLR or a piece of coax. I mean, IP doesn't add any value in that equation.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important to think about the workflow. So, even audio over IP, and audio definitely went IP before video did. And that's partly just because there was another technical hurdle when we were talking about video. But even if we think about our modern audio systems, audio over IP, or maybe I should say audio over a network, because, opticore, for example, it's not IP, but
Correct.
we're delivering a network.
Yep.
Right. That makes sense between consoles and stage boxes, but it doesn't make sense to the microphone.
Yeah.
And that is where we need to think about, where do we use which technology. I think we have to really think about what we're trying to gain. So certainly when we were dealing with a matrix intercom, or even something like MediaNet, what we're putting together is, make no mistake, a network. It's not an IP network though, but it is a network. Yeah. And what does that mean then? Well, a network is just something that allows us to connect a bunch of things together in such a way that those things are now part of a single whole, that we can make a whole bunch of logical connections between them that aren't necessarily dictated by the physical connections between them.
Well, it's like a shared resource.
Exactly. Yeah. And so a lot of that move to IP is not so much about trying to find a better way to move audio, because, and if you're doing IP right, if you're doing audio distribution right, there is absolutely no quality difference between an AES cable and a Dante stream and an AS67 stream and an AVB stream and an optical stream. They are exactly the same audio bits. They are just getting there in a different way.
Yep.
So,
well, they're just packaged differently.
They're packaged differently.
It's the same.
Exactly.
It's the same ones and zeros. We're just wrapping them in. We're putting them in a different envelope and sending them over a different courier.
So I remember back when I was doing a lot of this stuff, we'd have debates about whether, optical sounded better than this, and of course the answer is that it shouldn't. It should sound exactly the same. Any differences we're hearing between different digital audio streams, assuming that we are talking about the same ones and zeros, are down to other eccentricities of the equipment, not down to the fundamental method being used. So when I think about when we use audio video comms over IP, the critical factor here is that we need other things in our network that isn't the audio or the video. So let's think about comms. We already talked about how for comms, you need two things. You need the audio and you need the control. So that's now more than just audio. So now anytime we can put that on a transport system like IP, which gives us a data component and an audio component, then we've made our lives easier, because now everything's down one cable. Same's true of mixing consoles, right? We need to get that audio from the stage box to the console, but we also need to control the preamps. Maybe we need to activate, deactivate phantom power. We need to do a bunch of data things too, right? That's where that kind of IP comes in. And of course, in video, that's true as well. And then, of course, the thing that has been going on in the background in our industry is that we've been, opening up new ways to kind of interact with our equipment using IP. So, wireless mic receivers have had a network connection alongside that XLR connection for a long time. So adding those two things together so that now the audio and the network are on that IP connection is just kind of the next evolution. Yep. So that would be kind of in answer to Douglas's question. When I think about when do I want to use IP, the kind of first qualifier has got to be, well, I need the IP for something other than just moving the audio or video. Otherwise, I'm just making it more complicated, potentially.
Potentially, yep. No,
so, and I think most of our applications now do meet that qualifier, right? Because we do need to control something. Video's a classic one. So maybe you can say, well, with a camera, it's maybe slightly less obvious and less always true that I need the data. But if I think about a playback server, well, typically I need a big network for file transfer and things.
Yeah.
So, hey, now if I could put the video and the audio and stuff on that network, then potentially instead of building a network and then an audio distribution system and then a video distribution system, I've just built a network, and it completes all those tasks for me.
And that really is a key identifier when you start talking about utilizing IP in an infrastructure, is that you're not buying. So vendors will claim to sell you an IP solution, but at the end of the day, they're not selling you the infrastructure involved in standing up that IP solution. I mean, yes and no to a degree, because I mean, Riedel with the acquisition of Embryonics, you do sell switches now, that.
Yep.
But that is to support a specific.
As of Monday,
products.
we're an Arista dealer, so then we sell some switches double.
Exactly. So there you go. So there is, it's becoming more common these days, but traditionally, for example, I remember years ago at Hillsong Conference, you would say when you get to front of house, you would just dump an ARTA 64 at front of house, and you would add it to the optical ring. So you would just run a pair of single mode fibers, usually on a multi-core style, system, an MTP cable, to front of house, and then distribute out. So
that's exactly right. And you can think of that artist ring just like an optical ring. It's a proprietary way of connecting these frames where all those resources are now available across the network.
But my point being is that your staff are trained in your products. So therefore, standing an ARTA 64 up at front of house, you could ask your warehouse guy to do that, and he would already know how to do it.
Correct.
Switching that over to an IP-based infrastructure, all of a sudden, he now has to go and configure a bunch of switches and stand up an Ethernet topology to now support the IP that you want to run on that.
Yep.
And that's now brought another level of complexity. And this is what a lot of people are experiencing, and people find out the hard way. I mean, so things like Dante makes things super easy to consume. You don't need intelligent switches. You can buy the dumbest Netgear switch on the market, plug it in, you will get audio passing on your own without a network engineer's help.
Yeah.
Where it gets complex is large environments. And especially real-time environments where it's kind of mission critical that it stays up and running. So
and I think a good example of that is what we do with MediaNet, right? Because at the end of the day, there's a commercial relationship between you and I, right?
Yep.
Hillsong engage Riedel to provide a service.
Correct.
And ultimately that service is all about what happens at the edge. Ultimately, you don't care how I make your panel work. You're paying me to make it work.
That's right.
You don't care how I move the video from stage to front of house. You're paying me to move that video, to do it completely transparently, and to be ready 4 hours from opening the truck doors.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important that when we consider all these things, that we really just find the best solution for the job. And your point about Embryonics and our MediaNet product line is a good one, because now we have a complete SDI based product line and a complete IP based product line. Yep. The truth is that only the SDI product line can deliver Hillsong Conference from a practical perspective today.
Correct. Yep.
And that's because we'd still be configuring the IP systems when you wanted to let people in the building.
And we mentioned before with how we change a lot of things last minute. We try to be very flexible, and we like to partner with companies who are also very flexible in the way they can work, and they can react quickly to our changing needs. In an IP world, that's not so easy.
Not so easy. And look, I think it's worth saying that, just because Douglas did ask the question about video too, and dare I talk about video on an audio podcast, don't want to offend anybody, but I think the key difference here between audio over IP and video over IP is that when we were building Dante networks, we were generally just using switches that were easily available, right? Manufacturers had dozens of switches that would do this, and chances are the switches you already had would be in that category.
Yep.
With video over IP, I can guarantee you that if you're not doing it already, your switches won't do it, for sure.
Exactly. So you're not going to go out to your local Best Buy or anything like that, and you're not going to buy a switch that's sub $100.
Or even your normal IT vendor.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, and people argue the point of, NDI and things like that. And sure, there are use cases, but we're talking about uncompressed.
Yeah, absolutely.
So typically ST2110, when we sort of bring up, or AS67, which is in a -30. But, when we talk about this, we're talking about the uncompressed modern broadcast standards. So I mean, we've got 10 minutes left. So
good question, Douglas. I see Fabio's got an interesting question there about how do we pick where antennas go and how many do you need?
Well, that's it. Well, so for Bolero specifically, take it away.
Yeah, look, so I think there's two things you got to think about when you're putting antennas in. So firstly, Bolero is like a cellular network, right? So you put in your antennas in different places, and the belt packs talk to all of the antennas. So as they move around, they talk to the best antenna for wherever they are. So there's a couple of things you need to think about. First of all, you need to think about how many belt packs you're going to have, because each antenna can only talk to 10 at once. And that means that if you're going to have 20 in the arena, then you need at least 2 antennas, because otherwise only 10 of them would work. Then the second thing is you need to think about how far my antenna will reach, if you like, what the distance is. Now, in the case of Bolero, like Ricki said, any large arena is going to be able to be covered from a single position. And of course, you've got to think carefully a little bit about that position. So yes, it is true, we just put them up behind monitors, but they're up high and they've got good line of sight to the whole arena. If you just walk in there and you throw one under the stage and hope for the best, that's not going to work. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the way you think about it. Then most of these systems, and Bolero definitely so, gives you some tools built into it to think about how far antennas will reach. So there's a whole walk test functionality built into Bolero so that we can put those antennas up at monitors. And this is what we did the first time we did it. Obviously now when we do the conference again, we skip this step because we already know the answer. But the way we approached it first time is we put those antennas at monitors. Now we put 5 there, like Ricki said. That wasn't because they were spread out. That was because we needed to be able to have 50 belt packs work at the same time. And then we use the walk test mode to kind of figure out where that antenna stops working. And then we go, oh, that would be a good location for the next antenna. So that would help you. So yeah, I mean, if you're talking about rules of thumb, of course, you want to be working with vendors that can answer these questions for you with experience. That's kind of an important point number one. But the other thing I would say is that if I look back at all the projects we do, if I'm in one room, then really I just need an antenna, and so I just need the number of antennas that will serve the number of belt packs I want to use. Yeah. If I'm in a bigger venue, we would normally plan for a ratio of 1 to 5. It works out if I look back on all our projects. So it would typically be true that if I've got 10 belt packs and I'm in a big venue, then I'd probably need 2 antennas, because probably I need to cover more than one area. And that's pretty true at Kudos Bank Arena. It's a big arena like a lot of arenas. So the backstage corridor needs its own antennas because there's, several feet of concrete between the arena and the backstage corridor. But yeah, essentially you want to work with a vendor that can answer these questions for you based on experience. And line of sight is important whenever you do anything with high frequency wireless, just like when you're doing something with Wi-Fi. Ultimately, line of sight is really important.
Yeah. And just on that, the fact that we have 5 or 6 antennas behind monitors in the arena is because there's a potential to have 50, 55 belt packs in the arena. When you put them backstage, you don't need to put another 5 or 6 up in the same spot, because you don't have all 55 walking back there for any specific reason, right? So when you're in the back hallways or the back corridors, it's one every however long to deal with coverage as well as capacity.
Yeah.
But typically not every, you're not going to have every backline tech, every stage manager, every video tech, every floor manager, like everyone who's on a wireless belt pack is not going to walk down the back corridor at the same time. So every position doesn't need another 5 or 6 antennas.
That's correct. So I think at Hillsong Conference, it's true that the last one we did, I think we had, including spares and all that kind of stuff, we had 70 belt packs, and I think we brought 15 antennas to site.
Yeah.
I don't think we used all 15. I think we probably used 12 or 13.
Yep. Easy.
And then we had a couple in the drawer.
All right. So just wrapping up. So just sort of let's talk about the company for a second, because just in case people are curious. So Riedel Rental exists in Germany and Australia, specifically Sydney, where we are.
Yeah, most of Europe.
Most of Europe, yep.
Most of Europe, we have rental offices.
Mm-hmm.
In the UK, we have rental offices. In Australia, we have rental offices.
Yep.
In the US, we have a bunch of partner rental companies.
Yes. Yep.
And so you can certainly get in touch with Riedel in the US, who can tell you where the best partner for you is in your area. Obviously,
Yep.
the US is a big market and a big country. And so if you're on the West Coast or the East Coast, the answer might be different. And indeed, when we're talking about really big projects, we have a kind of a whole global events division who are able to kind of parachute in with whatever.
And I mean, they work on really small projects like Formula One and things like that.
The Olympics and Formula One and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. So they don't, and they a lot. And just briefly, because this is something I'm a bit of a fan of, but the like, and this is what one of the things I love about Riedel is like the relationship with Red Bull.
We've done a lot of things with Red Bull over the years.
Exactly. So there's all of that sort of stuff, because a lot of these especially the extreme sports, and I think Red Bull goes beyond extreme sports, because I mean, who drops a guy who free falls off from the edge of space?
Well, exactly.
That's not possible communications wise without a good communications partner, and the fact that you guys are behind a lot of that, it gives me the confidence to know that my small events are going to be well taken care of. So
yeah, and look, I think from our perspective, we're really about delivering solutions. If you phone our office up, you phone my office up, and you just need 10 belt packs for a week, yeah, we can help you out. But that's not really why we do the managed technology kind of side of things. We're really most of our clients and most of our projects are based around really working with the person putting on the event to deliver a whole solution. And as Ricki pointed out, what comes in the back of the Riedel truck, if you like, to Hillsong Conference is, of course, mostly Riedel equipment, but there's a bunch of network switches and there's a bunch of computers and some screens and some, there's just the whole package that you need to make that work. And of course, the right people to deliver it too. So I would say to people, whether you're working with us or whether you're working with anybody, you really don't get, blinded by the gear, because ultimately in these really good solutions, the end result's better than the sum of its parts, and that's done because of logistics and people and processes and all the things that really make an event happen. We all know that you can put an SD7 in the hands of a bad engineer, or give a front of house guy and his console a bad stage crew, and you'll end up with a bad result, even though the gear would tell you otherwise. So it's definitely about the whole solution.
Absolutely. And you very quickly sort of touched on it, the fact that you mentioned sort of standing it all up in 4 hours, and that just for everyone watching, that's not a joke.
We're in.
When the truck pulls up, like it usually takes days to load in a Hillsong conference, but things that are critical infrastructure, both MediaNet as backbone infrastructure and communications, especially when we're interfacing with two-way radios and the networking that comes along with that, that kind of needs to be up and running first, so everybody can onboard and start utilizing those services. Especially like, because we use MediaNet as our primary signal distribution system. So
nearly every signal touches MediaNet at least once.
Exactly. So you see all of these LED walls go up, but that signal to the LED wall doesn't get there without MediaNet. So it kind of needs to be up and running first. So, when Chris mentioned that it's up in 4 hours, he wasn't kidding. When that truck backs up, 4 hours later, that entire system is stood up and running.
And then we can use our time to do other things that we'd rather do, right? And for us, when we talk about trying to help our customers save money, it's not so much about spending less money on equipment. It's about being able to do more with it in the given amount of time. I mean, Hillsong would much rather rent Kudos Bank Arena for a day to do an event or do rehearsals for an event than they would like to rent a venue just so people can run cable around it.
Exactly.
So the less time we can spend plugging things in, the more time we can spend, doing rehearsals and making the show great, making the experience great for all the delegates.
All right. Well, I can't thank you enough, mate. Thank you for jumping on board. And,
thanks for having me.
Giving us a rundown. And if anyone's got any last second questions, quickly throw them in. Otherwise, I'm going to wrap it up here. Thanks again, Chris. And thank you as always to Riedel Communications. And it honestly, great company. Thomas Riedel himself, the owner, has been out to visit us at Hillsong Conference and he's actually been to the Hills campus and You know, and that's kind of just as go, you know, that sort of goes to show the sort of the dedication the company has to their customers. And, you know, personally came to show me the Bolero pack when it was a prototype to sort of get my thoughts and opinions on it and things like that. And as a supplier and as a customer and as an end user, I definitely appreciate that, because that's, we were definitely going to go down that path. So getting the heads up and being able to have input into the products, and having a vendor that actually listens to you as a customer and takes your thoughts and considerations on board, speaks volumes, especially in our environment. So
thank you.
Definitely really appreciate it. Cool. Well, that's it, guys. This will be, you know, keep an eye on Instagram for the next posts coming up, and the links to YouTube and all of that good stuff. If you've got any questions or any more questions, or you want us to talk about anything very specifically, feel free to go and leave a comment on the post on Instagram. Otherwise, we'll see you next week. Thanks again, Chris.
See ya.